The most famous line in all of Western esotericism, "as above, so below," does not exist in the Emerald Tablet, not in a single verified ancient translation. That phrase was invented in the 20th century. And if that's wrong, you have to ask, what else is? There is no physical Emerald Tablet. No one has ever found a green stone. The tablet is a literary device, first appearing in an Arabic manuscript around 800 CE. The text that launched alchemy, influenced Newton, and underpins every Hermetic tradition you've ever encountered exists only as ink on paper. The actual Emerald Tablet is 13 sentences. Sentence 7, the operational core, reads, "Separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross." Newton underlined it. Jung spent 30 years decoding it. It describes a mental operation, not a chemical one. Here's what that means at scale. The Kybalion, the book most people think is the Hermetic tradition, was written in 1908 by a Chicago businessman with no access to primary sources. The phrase, "as above, so below," comes from that book, not the tablet. Millions of people have been studying a 20th century summary of a mistranslation of a text that may itself be a translation of something older. Here's something most commentators skip. One of the Hermetic tractates, Tractate 16, contains an unusual warning. The author writes that translating these texts from Greek into other languages destroys the power of the words themselves. He calls it the loss of energia, the active force embedded in the original tongue. It's an odd footnote. We'll come back to it. So here is the open question that drives this entire investigation. If the text Newton studied privately is not the text being taught publicly, if the core phrase is wrong, the physical tablet doesn't exist, and the most popular book in the tradition was written by a New Thought entrepreneur in 1908, then what does the actual Emerald Tablet say, and why has nobody been teaching it? Think about the last self-improvement system you abandoned, the habit you built for 3 weeks and lost, the mindset shift that lasted until Tuesday. Here is what the actual Hermetic tradition claims. Every system that operates only on behavior, on what you do, without first restructuring what you are, will fail at the same point, always. That is not motivational language. That is the operational logic of the Emerald Tablet. In 391 CE, Emperor Theodosius issued the decree that shuttered the Serapeum, the last functioning library of the ancient Mediterranean world. 700 years of Hermetic transmission was interrupted in a single generation. What survived did so because individual scholars carried texts in memory and in secret, not because institutions protected them. In 1463, a Florentine monk named Leonardo da Pistoia returned from Macedonia with a Greek manuscript. He brought it to Cosimo de' Medici. Cosimo, who was dying, ordered his court scholar Marsilio Ficino to stop translating Plato immediately and translate this first. He believed it was more urgent. That manuscript was the Corpus Hermeticum. Cosimo died before Ficino finished, but Ficino finished it. 3 languages, 3 transmissions, Greek to Arabic to Latin, and at each step, according to the tradition's own texts, something was lost. The question is, what? That is what we're going to find out. The oldest religious texts on Earth were carved into the stone walls of the Unas pyramid at Saqqara around 2375 BCE. They predate the Bible by 1800 years. Egyptologists call them the pyramid texts, and they describe, in precise sequential language, the soul's ascent through cosmic gates, using specific words as operational keys. That structure is identical to the Emerald Tablet's operational sequence, 2,000 years before the tablet existed. Corpus Hermeticum Tractate 1, the Poimanders, describes the soul's descent through 7 planetary spheres before birth. At each sphere, it acquires a limitation: aggression from Mars, pride from Saturn, desire from Venus. The Emerald Tablet's "what is above is like what is below" is not a metaphor about nature. It is a map of what you brought down with you and what you have to send back up. The word alchemy comes from Arabic alchemia, which comes from the Greek chemia, which is the ancient name for Egypt, Kemet, meaning the Black Land. Alchemy literally means the science of Egypt. That etymology has been hiding in the word the entire time. If you watched our previous investigation into Thoth, the Egyptian god credited with authoring the Hermetic texts, you'll remember that the ancient Egyptians called him the scribe of the gods and attributed 36,525 books to him. The Emerald Tablet is claimed to be one of them. We're going to test that claim against the actual historical record right now. Isaac Newton translated the Emerald Tablet himself, not for publication, for private study. His manuscript was found in the Portsmouth collection in 1936, 209 years after his death. In his translation, sentence 7, the operational line, was annotated more heavily than any other. Newton's public work described a mechanical universe governed by invisible forces. His private work suggested he understood why those forces operated as they did. He never published that connection. Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake in Rome in 1600. His charges included teaching Hermetic cosmology, that the universe is infinite and animated by a universal mind. That is a direct application of the Emerald Tablet's central principle. The Church understood what the text meant. That understanding cost Bruno his life. Carl Jung spent over 30 years studying alchemical manuscripts. His conclusion, published in Mysterium Conjunctionis in 1956, was that alchemy was a projection system, that alchemists were unconsciously describing the transformation of the psyche using the language of chemistry. He arrived at this interpretation independently. Arab scholar Jabir ibn Hayyan had written the same interpretation in 850 CE, 900 years earlier. Neither man cited the other. They were reading the same operating manual. Here is the scholarly dispute this field has never resolved. Historians like Lawrence Principe have established that the Emerald Tablet's earliest verified appearance is an 8th century Arabic manuscript, making it medieval, not ancient Egyptian. Against that, tradition scholars point to pyramid text structures, Platonic parallels, and the Corpus Hermeticum's own account of oral transmission as evidence of far older roots. Both positions have primary source support. Both cannot be entirely correct. We are presenting both and leaving this open. The Kybalion, the book that introduced millions of people to Hermetic principles, was published in 1908. Its author, William Walker Atkinson, wrote under the pseudonym 3 Initiates. It contains 0 citations to primary ancient sources. It synthesizes the Emerald Tablet, the Corpus Hermeticum, and New Thought philosophy into a single accessible framework. It is a remarkable book. It is not the Hermetic tradition. That distinction matters more than people realize. The actual Emerald Tablet, in its oldest complete Latin version, contains exactly 13 sentences. Most commentaries focus on the first and last. The operational core, sentences 5 through 9, describes a 4-part sequence: separation, purification, descent, and ascent, in that order. That sequence appears in the pyramid texts. It appears in the Poimandres. It appears in the Zoroastrian Avesta. Same sequence, different vocabularies. Neuroscientist Michael Merzenich demonstrated in 2013 that sustained mental focus physically reorganizes the brain's cortical maps. New neural pathways form, old ones dissolve. The above, the mental state, is literally restructuring the below, the physical architecture. The Emerald Tablet's operational sequence is a description of this mechanism, written 1,200 years before Merzenich had a laboratory. So here is where the evidence has brought us. The Emerald Tablet's core teaching that mental states generate physical outcomes has been verified by neuroscience, anticipated by Hermetic cosmology, encoded in the pyramid texts, and privately studied by Newton. The mainstream history of science and philosophy simply does not mention any of this. Why? That question has an answer, and it is not the one you're expecting. The standard explanation is institutional suppression. The Church feared Hermetic cosmology. Authorities banned it. Bruno died for it. The teaching went underground, preserved in coded form in alchemical manuscripts, which is why it reads as chemistry instead of philosophy. That explanation is coherent. It is supported by historical evidence. It is also incomplete. Here is the case for survival intact. After the 391 CE suppression, Hermetic texts were carried into the Arab world. Scholars at the House of Wisdom in Baghdad translated the Greek originals into Arabic in the 8th and 9th centuries. Jabir ibn Hayyan, the father of Arab alchemy, cited Hermetic principles directly in 150 documented works. The teaching survived. It adapted. It was preserved. That is the resolution. Except the Arab Emerald Tablet that Jabir worked from was itself a translation of a lost Greek text, which was itself a translation of a source that scholars cannot identify. And Corpus Hermeticum Tractate 16, the text we mentioned in passing earlier, explicitly states that this exact chain of translation destroys the operative function of the words. The Arab alchemists preserved the words, but the text warned that preserving the words is not the same as preserving the teaching. So the question was never, did the text survive? It did. The question was, did the meaning survive? And the answer, according to the tradition's own internal documentation, is no. The text survived, the teaching did not. Those are two different things entirely. Here is the belief you need to release before we go further. The idea that ancient wisdom is automatically pure and uncorrupted because it is ancient. It is not. Transmission has a cost. Every translation is a reduction. Knowing this is not cynicism. It is the first requirement of the tradition itself. Remember Tractate 16, the footnote about translation destroying the power of words? Here is the full passage. The author writes, "Our speech and that of the Egyptians differ, and speech when translated from our tongue into the tongue of the Greeks does not keep the same meaning. This is not a minor literary complaint. The author is describing a specific mechanism. The Hermetic tradition was not buried by persecution. That is a symptom. The actual mechanism is in Tractate 16. The teaching was built around the energeia of specific Greek and Egyptian phonemes. When those phonemes became Arabic equivalents, the operative activation embedded in the sound patterns was severed from the conceptual content. You kept the map, you lost the territory. Newton had the Latin translation, what remained of the map. What no scholar after the Greek to Arabic step could recover was the frequency at which the map was meant to be read. This is why sentence 7 was the sentence Newton underlined. Separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, gently with great ingenuity. That is not a recipe. That is an instruction for cognitive surgery. Identify what in your mental model is gross, heavy, inherited, assumed. Identify what is subtle, the operative principle beneath the assumption. Separate them. The Emerald Tablet is a manual for distinguishing the map you inherited from the territory it was meant to describe. The open question from the beginning of this investigation, why hasn't the actual Emerald Tablet been taught? The answer is not suppression by external forces. The answer is in the text itself, in a warning that was issued before the text was translated, describing exactly what would happen and that every single subsequent generation ignored. The hiding mechanism was baked into the transmission from the first step. What was lost was not a secret kept by elites. What was lost was a technology that required its original operating conditions, the specific phonemic structure of ancient Greek and Egyptian, to function as designed. When those conditions were removed, the technology became a metaphor, and metaphors do not perform operations, they only suggest them. Here is what changes when you understand this. The Emerald Tablet is not primarily a historical artifact, it is a compressed operational description of how consciousness interacts with material reality. The phonemic activation may be lost, the conceptual map is not, and the map, properly read, is still functional. Newton proved it, Jung proved it, Merzenich proved it from a different direction. In 1982, mathematician Benoit Mandelbrot published his proof of fractal geometry, that identical mathematical patterns repeat at every scale of observation, from subatomic structures to galactic formations. He called it scale-invariant self-similarity. The Emerald Tablet called it as above, so below, or more precisely, what is above is like what is below. Mandelbrot gave us the equations, the tablet gave us the principle. They are describing the same architecture. Every self-improvement system fails at the same point, not because you lack discipline, not because the system is wrong, because the system is operating on the below, behavior, environment, routine, without first restructuring the above, the mental model that generates the behavior automatically. The Emerald Tablet identified this as the fundamental error of any transformation attempt. You cannot reorganize outcomes while the generator of outcomes remains unchanged. Change the above, the below follows. This is not motivation, this is mechanism. What the Emerald Tablet is offering, in its compressed 13-sentence form, is a cognitive diagnostic tool. It asks you to distinguish the gross from the subtle in your own operating model. Not your behaviors, your assumptions, the ones you have never examined because you inherited them from a tradition that was itself working from a mistranslation. Physicist David Bohm proposed in 1980 that what we experience as separate physical objects are projections of a deeper non-local wholeness he called the implicate order. The Emerald Tablet's one thing from which all things proceed is the same structural claim, stated as principle rather than equation. Both are working maps of the same territory, arrived at independently 1,200 years apart. The paradigm that has shifted, the Emerald Tablet is not a relic of pre-scientific magical thinking. It is a compressed operational description of a principle that physics, neuroscience, and analytical psychology have independently verified, each in a different vocabulary. The translation was broken, the principle was not. Here is the operative sequence from the actual Emerald Tablet, not the paraphrase, not the Kybalion. 3 steps, derived directly from sentences 5 through 9, the sequence Newton annotated, the sequence Jung spent 30 years mapping. You can begin this today. Step 1. Separation. Identify one belief that is generating a result you did not choose, not the behavior, the belief beneath it. Write it down. That is the gross. Now identify what you actually know directly from experience about that domain. That is the subtle. Separate them. Step 2. Purification. Remove every element of the belief that cannot be traced to direct experience. What remains after you have removed all inherited assumptions, all borrowed authority, all unexamined defaults, is the operative core. Work only with that. Step 3. Ascent. Reconstruct the model from the operative core outward, only adding back what you can verify. Then descend. Apply it to one concrete situation. Observe the result. The sequence is solve coagula, dissolve and reconstitute. It is the Emerald Tablet's central operation. It takes about 20 minutes. The reason this works when behavioral systems don't is you are operating on the generator of behavior, not the behavior itself. Every habit system, every accountability structure, every productivity framework is addressing the below. The Emerald Tablet says, fix the above first. The below reorganizes automatically. That is not a promise, it is a mechanism claim, and it is testable. Example: you have tried to build a consistent writing practice and failed repeatedly. The behavioral approach adds more structure, earlier alarms, word count targets. The Hermetic approach asks first, what is the belief generating the avoidance? Identify it, separate it from what you directly know, reconstruct, then apply the behavioral structure. In that sequence, it sticks. Here is the debate this field has not resolved. Newton's private Hermetic studies were contemporary with his development of the inverse square law. Did his Hermetic framework, his private working model of hidden forces acting at a distance, contribute to his published physics? Historians are divided. The evidence is circumstantial. We are not claiming causation, we are noting the simultaneity. But here is the dilemma the tradition itself identifies. If you apply the three-step sequence without first understanding what the Corpus Hermeticum Tractate 1 calls nous, the divine mind principle, you will produce exactly the same results as every failed self-improvement attempt, just with more sophisticated vocabulary. The Emerald Tablet is one document in a system. Applying it in isolation produces exactly the same error it was designed to correct. This is the seeker's dilemma. The Emerald Tablet gives you the operational principle. The Corpus Hermeticum gives you the cosmological context. The pyramid texts give you the original encoding. You need all three to work the system as designed. This channel exists to build that foundation, one investigation at a time. You now have the actual three-step sequence from the Emerald Tablet's operational core. You have the historical context that explains why it disappeared, and you have the scholarly debate that surrounds it. That is enough to begin. The full system requires more. We are building toward it. The tablet was never buried. The translation was. That is the entire investigation in 10 words. The principle survived intact in the evidence. The operating instructions did not survive the language. Here is the one question this investigation does not answer and cannot answer. If Corpus Hermeticum Tractate 16 is correct that the energeia of the teaching exists only in its original phonemic structure, then every translation, including this narration, carries the same limitation it described. We may have just transmitted the map of a map. That implication is left open, deliberately. You now know the history of the Emerald Tablet, but to actually apply Thoth's wisdom, you have to stop believing the universe is judging you. Click the video on the screen right now to break the karma lie and master true cause and effect.